Hi, I'm Marie Hendry. I'm a bookseller at Barnes & Noble, and I'm so excited to be talking to the Queen of Cliffhangers, Juno Dawson, author of The Shadow Cabinet, the second book in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven trilogy. Juno, hi, we meet again.
Hello.
I'm going to try to have the least spoilery conversation with you as possible. Do you accept the challenge?
I accept. I'm ready. No spoilers.
Can you give everyone a quick elevator pitch of the HMRC trilogy and what the heck is going on in the Shadow Cabinet?
I can. So Her Majesty's Royal Coven, it's like an urban fantasy, for want of a better phrase, about a group of modern women who live in the United Kingdom, and they just so happen to work for a government agency of very powerful witches. And for as long as we've all been alive, there has been this government department, a government-sanctioned coven, working to keep us all safe from what they call supernormal threat, which is demons and the like, evil warlocks as well. The first book, full of drama, lots of drama, some very exciting and very spoilery things happened. Mm-hmm. So the second book picks up straight after the first book. We have our transgender witch Thea, who is still coming to terms with having undergone a magical transformation. And Leonie is tasked with tracking down Dabney Hale, who is a rebel warlock who believes in magical supremacy. So she goes off on a jaunt around Europe. Mm-hmm. Without giving anything away, the character of Kira is back. I think it's going to be impossible to talk about the Shadow Cabinet without talking about Kira.
Yeah, I feel like we're going to have to just spoil a little bit of Her Majesty's Royal Coven because...
I think it's okay. Kira's back. Kira's back. She's in a coma in book one, but Kira, who is Neve's wayward twin sister, she used to be a part of Dabney Hale's rebellion. Mm-hmm. She is back, and we are heading towards the coronation of High Priestess. And we finally meet the Shadow Cabinet, who are the humans who are one of a very limited number of people who know about the existence of witches, and that includes the Prime Minister as well. That's who the Shadow Cabinet is.
I remember talking to you last year, and I was like, how dare you with that cliffhanger? So I'm so glad that you picked it back up. Like there's no guessing what happened right after that. You picked it up right where it needed to. So thank you. What kinds of powers do these witches have?
In my world, there are 4 official kinds of witch. So you have mind readers called sentients. There are healers. There are elementals who can control the natural elements around them. And there is oracles who can obviously see the past and future, see the great tapestry of time. And then there is a 5th illegal kind of witch, which are the necromancers, which we do not talk about. And then some very blessed witches are adepts, like Neve, Kira, and Thea. They possess more than one skill set.
And which of the witches do you most relate to?
Ooh, well, I mean, I've said before that they're all me, and it took me a little bit of time to realize that was kind of how it was. And I'm wearing my Spice Girl top at the moment, and I think that's kind of why the Spice Girls appealed so much to sort of 90s girls, because we all contain multitudes. You know, there are days where I feel decidedly scary. There are days when I just want to be babied. There are days when I, want to be quirky and outrageous and be Ginger Spice. And I think that's kind of what I've done with the Coven as well, where, you've got this incredible sort of the maternalness of Elle.
Yeah.
You've got the rebellion of Leonie, who is always kicking against the stable door. And then you've kind of got the kindness and compassion of Neve, and of course the complete devil may care attitude that Kira has. And that's why book 2 was so much fun, to finally be able to give Kira a voice. And yes, she's completely unhinged, but sometimes so am I. And, Kira does some outrageous things in this novel. She's kind of me if I didn't have that filter. You know, and there have been times when I've really wanted to tell people what I think to their faces, but I don't, because like Neve, I want to be liked, but there is a definite thread of Kira within me. And so it's really nice to now finally have all 5 members of that girl group in play. Because obviously Kira was on the bench for all of book one.
It's so interesting because in book one, we don't actually get to know her. We only get to hear about her from everyone. And she sounds so terrible, horrible, scary, but you made her really complex, rounded person where I was like, oh, I see what she has gone through and how she ended up this way. What inspired her? I know you said you've got parts of her. Was it, were you just taking from like the parts of you to make a person like that? Or
I'm so glad you said that, because I mean, I did really, really worry that, and a lot has been said about unlikable female characters, but it's risk. And I think a lot of readers really engage with those kinds of very sort of morally grey female characters, but some readers, not naming names, but my husband, when he's read some of my YA fiction, he's looking like, well, I just didn't like her. And I'm like, well, I'm not a complex female character, Matt.
Exactly.
But, exactly. I wanted, Dabney Hale as a villain is quite irredeemable. In the first book, Helena, the character of Helena, was quite villainous with some of the things she did, and she made some really bad choices. And so I wanted the same for Kira. She does some really unpleasant things, but I think she has a motive for everything she does. And what was really lovely is that from the beginning of the book, we realized that because of Kira's injuries in book one, she can't remember vast chunks of her adult life. Like her childhood is more or less intact, but her adult life is a complete patchwork mess, kind of. And so we go on that journey with her of her trying to piece together her own timeline. And she's kind of making this jigsaw of her own life. And we start to realize that almost from childhood, Kira was almost doomed. There was a prophecy about her as a child, and her life becomes this kind of awful story of self-fulfilling prophecy, kind of. And I love her. I mean, I know I'm going to go on the record right now at Barnes & Noble and say she's not a good woman. She does some awful things.
But she can be.
I love her. She can be good. Yeah, she can.
I loved her too. I really loved her.
I'm so glad.
Because how much of that is like expectations that were put on her that she was like, well, I guess I'm just bad, so I'm going to be bad. And how much of it is like, seeing the way the world treated her twin sister, who is angelic, and feeling that jealousy. Like if she was treated the way that Neve was, would she have been different?
Exactly. And because they're identical twins, it gives us a lovely, and twins in fantasy fiction, you could do a whole kind of PhD on that. But I think Kira, even more than most, struggles because there's this other woman in the world who looks exactly like her.
Yeah.
She's treated so differently. And it feels like, because a lot of characters in this book believe that Kira is Neve for much of the book. They treat her the way that Neve has always been treated. And it's really interesting to see that kind of, I guess it's a big question about nature versus nurture. And that's kind of what Kira has to work out, which is there something fundamentally evil about Kira Kelly? Or was she just treated very badly by both the men and the women in her life have treated her quite badly?
Yeah. And even like, when her college memories come back, when she starts getting into, her bad years with her boyfriend and with Dabney, and there's demons. I don't feel like that's too spoilery because there's a lot of demons throughout.
So many demons.
It's almost like you could read it as like, yeah, those are evil aspects of her, or it can be interpreted as like she is a young person who feels unsure about her place in the world. And unfortunately, a lot of young people who lack that self-confidence get into experimenting with drugs and alcohol, and hers were demons and bad boys.
Yeah, I'm definitely not the first fantasy writer to use actual demons as an allegory for sort of allegorical demons. I mean, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, there's a whole series where monsters were monsters, kind of. What I love about Kira is that she thinks she's very in control. And I love how her own narrative about herself is in kind of stark contrast to what you as the reader can see, which is actually she's been very exploited. And I think in lots of ways she's quite vulnerable. And, she would never admit that. But I think hopefully the reader will see that she talks a very good game, but actually she is a very vulnerable young woman.
And I think there's something to say too, like about the other girls that grew up with her that see those redeeming qualities in her. Like Leonie loves her. Elle loved her too. It seemed like when they were young, she was a little bit scared of her, but she still loved her. So she wasn't totally bad and evil like she thought. It just, I really felt for her in the book.
I'm really, really glad, because I was going to say it was a risk. I mean, there was a reason we didn't start with Kira in book one. That would have been a bold move. But I think obviously there was plenty of shocks in book one, but it was always right from the very beginning of this trilogy. It was always going to be the case that Neve was very much the spotlight in book one, and then Kira would always come center stage in book two. That was always the plan. And I'm really pleased. As a trilogy writer, this is my first trilogy. I was very, very mindful of the middle book syndrome. And I think any author is very familiar that it can be the muddy middle kind of. And the reviews have been so good. I'm so relieved. As soon as the first few reviews came in, I think it was from America, actually, things like Booklist. I was like,
So it's called Her Majesty's Royal Coven. Can you talk about the connection with Anne Boleyn and why it's not going to turn into His Majesty's Royal Coven now?
Yes, the Queen, rest her soul, did die towards the very end of it. This book was finished. This book was so done. And straight away, literally the day she died, people were like on my social media being like, will you change it to His Majesty's Royal Coven? And we did. So there's a midway when the characters finally meet the Prime Minister, who's Guy Milner, when they meet Guy Milner at Whitehall. And he does point out, shouldn't it be His Majesty's Royal Coven now? Because going forward, we will have kings for a good long while now. And I said, initially I was going to change it. But then I was like, no, because these witches have served historically two queens, in that Anne Boleyn, she was the founder. She was the first one to start the coven in the early 16th century. And then later it was formally started under Queen Victoria. So I was like, these women have always served a queen rather than a king. And I quite like that symbolically. HMRC is, we are and have always been Her Majesty's Royal Coven. Since 1869, they have been Her Majesty's Royal Coven.
Yeah, I loved that. And I was like, I'm so glad that it's not turning into His Majesty's Royal Coven. It just wouldn't feel right if they were serving the king.
And I think book two as well. I think so. It was and I would like to again to put this on the record. I was aware that there are issues around England's colonial past, which kind of doesn't sit very well with the idea of being a witch. These women, and Kira says in this book, she says, we are weapons of an ancient goddess. It all comes back to Gaia. It all comes back to this feminine divine from which the women draw their strength. So why are they serving this draconian, archaic institution? You might tell that I'm not the biggest royalist in the country.
Yeah.
So you might say, why are they doing that? And actually in the first book, Neve has quit HMRC, Leonie has quit HMRC, Elle has never worked for HMRC. So there's only Helena in the first book who even works for HMRC. And I think in book two, you get an even stronger sense that all is not well with this organisation. It's a bit like Sex and the City. The fifth character is HMRC. And they're running through the whole trilogy. There is a narrative and a conversation to be had about structures and institutions. Obviously, Leonie is fiercely against the institution and has started her own rival coven. And Kira repeatedly questions, why would we sign up for this?
Yeah, it's so interesting, the conversation that they can have around institutional issues and hierarchies and how being part of it can be beneficial in a way, but mostly it's antithetical to what they really are as witches.
And that, again, I'm writing book 3 at the moment, so really don't want to do spoilers for book 3, but that's a conversation that will run throughout the whole trilogy, which is how in the modern world can women work within patriarchal structures? And if book 1 is about conflict between women, book 2 is about conflict between men and women, and then book 3 will explore the role of women within a patriarchy. So that was always the plan. And it feels quite nice that obviously I think I started HMRC in like 2018. It's still the case that 3-part structure is still more or less accurate.
Oh, that's great. That's a really great flow. So what's your process? Like, does it differ when you're writing fiction versus nonfiction?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while now since I've written nonfiction, because whereas before I used to juggle fiction and nonfiction, now I'm mostly juggling fiction and screenwriting. So if I'm not working on a novel, I'm working on a script. So right now, never say never, but there isn't any room to do more nonfiction, which is obviously interesting because at the moment in America, there is so much conversation about this book is gay and what's the tea. But those books, like I wrote This Book is Gay 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But in terms of the process, now it feels like my career's entered like a slightly new phase where, I was quite happily pottering along in total anonymity for the best part of 10 years. But, Her Majesty's Royal Coven has gone through the roof. I mean, especially in the UK, it was number 1 and that brings lots of interest. And obviously we've optioned it for television as well. So it kind of, there's lots going on. And so it means now, ironically, I just have less time to write, full stop. I'm in full promotion mode at the moment, but when I come back, I'm going to be touring the US in June. When I get back...
Yeah, you're going to do a story time here.
I am. I'm very excited.
You need to chill. I read it to my son. Yeah.
Isn't it cute?
It's so cute.
So when I get back in July, I'm going like emails off, fun off, and I'm going to not come out of my little house until HMRC 3 is done.
Oh, that's exciting.
It is, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's kind of that is still my favorite bit of the job, when I have nothing in my diary and I have a whole day to write.
Yeah, that's the dream.
Oh, it's the dream. And I must admit, obviously COVID was a living, breathing nightmare, but I wrote HMRC in 2020 and it was really beautiful to just spend that whole year kind of just really immersed in the world of these women.
It's so wonderful that you were able to create during that time. I was just so stalled on everything that I feel like I wasted that year home.
No, we can't think of it like that, because now it's only now when I look back that I realize how bad my mental health was during that year. We are social creatures. We are not meant to stay home and not see our friends. And especially when you're writing a book about female friendship as well, it was not the best environment to be writing about female friendship.
Do you do a lot of group texts?
Oh, so many. Well,
there's a lot of group texts in the Shadow Cabinet.
Well, there really is. And that was kind of, again, born out of the pandemic, which is, Zoom and WhatsApp was
it's
such
modern friendship is group texts all day long, every day, right?
And I love how group texts have their own politics as well. Like you've got the group chat, and then you've got the side group chat. But then there is usually in any group chat, there's like the one person where you're going to be like, can you believe what she's just said? That's
definitely
wild.
Okay, so you mentioned This Book is Gay. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Let's.
Okay, so last year, This Book is Gay became the 9th most banned book in the country. Wild. I read it, and though I'm not the intended audience, I think it's an incredible resource for young people. Can you talk a little bit about how it came about?
Yeah, so we're going to wind back to 2012, a long time ago. I had been a teacher for a long time, and one of my many roles when I was a teacher was I was a consultant for what in this country we call PSHE, Personal Social Health Education. And a thread of that is sex and relationships education. And I was really good at it. And I was sent all around the area to kind of best advise schools on how to deliver really sort of top-notch PSHE. And when my publisher got wind of this, they were like, we need you to write something. Would you write something for LGBTQ teenagers? Initially, I was like, no, because at that point, I hadn't even started my own transition. And so I didn't feel I could, for example, I didn't feel I could speak on behalf of bisexual people or lesbians because I had never done that. I'd never lived that life. And so it felt kind of hypocritical. But then I mulled on it a bit and I sort of said, well, look, what if I sort of did some surveying and did some interviews with lots of members of the community? Would that work? And they were like, sure. And I wanted it to have a voice and I wanted it to have a sense of humour.
Mm-hmm.
I'd read Caitlin Moran's How to Be a Woman, which was huge over here that year.
Yeah, so I remember that.
But what about something a bit like that? That kind of feels a bit like a Big Sister vibe, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it came about. And the UK publisher were really cool. Source Books in the US bought it immediately. And it came out in the US in 2015 with very little fanfare. It didn't really make a fuss. David Levithan, the amazing author, gave us a foreword for the American version, but it certainly didn't cause any controversy. It didn't ruffle any feathers whatsoever until about, I think it was about 2017 when it first started making headlines. And you will notice by 2017, we were into Trump's America.
Yeah, it totally tracks with where we were, unfortunately.
Yeah, the first area where it was challenged was in Walsilla, Alaska, which was Sarah Palin's district.
Yeah.
So the dominoes just started to fall. But still, to be honest, there was the odd, maybe once or twice a year, there was a little bit of a fuss around it, but nothing on the scale that we've seen in the last 18 months to 2 years. It's a strange loop. Like when PEN America or the American Libraries Association identifies which books are being challenged, then they get more challenged because obviously the people who have made a real hobby out of challenging books, it's almost like they've been handed a shopping list. But I just think that's certainly not on the ALA. I mean, how sad is it that there are people out there who have made a pastime out of tracking down books and trying to ban them? I think it's bonkers. Kind of the last sort of 12 months have been quite challenging. And it's frustrating, to be so willfully taken out of context.
If they even just gave it a chance and read it and tried to understand, like, this is something that is going to monumentally help young people understand themselves and or the world around them, is not inappropriate.
No, and I think if you take a little snippet out of context and tweet it, anything, it looks wild. I mean, for one thing, the first thing they say is that this is a children's book, and This Book Is Gay is absolutely not a children's book. I mean, we never said it was a children's book. It was published by a YA publisher. It's, so we were never claiming that. But more to the point, a lot of these accounts have realized you can't argue with crazy. They tweet things saying it's from This Book Is Gay, and it's not from This Book Is Gay. So that they're just literally screen grabbing any old stuff and saying, oh my gosh, this is pornographic. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's not from my book. That's from somebody else's book, kind of. But by that point, the internet doesn't care. The internet's already shared it 1,000 times, kind of. So it's kind of, it doesn't matter if they then later say, oh, sorry, it's not from Juno Dawson's book. It's a political tactic that's being fought in both the UK and the US, where both of our countries have very real systemic problems with poverty, fuel prices. Europe is at war, and our I think certainly in the UK, it feels like our politicians are failing. The only people they have to blame are themselves. And so it's much, much easier to talk about a book, to talk about, trans healthcare, than it is to talk about the real problems that are affecting our country. And I think that the difference in the US is that now that the right are out of power, there's been a very organized attempt to say, well, we can't do anything centrally. We can't do anything in government, but we can cause a lot of noise on a very local level. So, we can make noise in a school, we can make a noise in a library, we can picket a drag queen story hour. It's not about children. And I've said this in Rolling Stone magazine, it's not about children. Because if it was about children, they would be talking about banning guns.
Yeah.
They would be talking about vaccines. There are so many ways that we can protect children that would do a much more efficient job than boycotting a drag queen reading a picture book.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was saying last year during the formula shortage was like, if they really cared about the babies, they would be trying to find a way to get food for the babies. It's all been so unfortunately politicized. I have a friend who works in a Florida school district who has to attend these like banned books meetings, and it takes so much out of her as a person and as a parent. And since I became a parent, we're having a lot of conversations about the approaches that we want to take. I feel like This Book is Gay and What's the Tea, they're not for me, like the intended audience. But I love that you have taken these really big topics that have become unfortunately politicized, and you've making them digestible. And I think what's more important is that you write with such kindness and love and acceptance. Like your overlying message is like, this is normal. You're okay. Everything's okay. I really loved that. And What's the Tea? You had a section for advice for parents and caregivers. My son is still very young, but I'm going to have these books on my shelf. I want to have them as a resource so that as he grows up and he is naturally curious about the world or perhaps himself, I can turn to these books and say, like, these are the ways that we can talk about these things, or these are the ways that you can help understand yourself. Did you ever think that that would be a way people would read these books?
Oh, I really hope that. That was in mind. So first and foremost, I wrote it for myself when I was 15. And I think that's true of my YA fiction. It's true of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, because I couldn't quite find a book like it. So I thought, I liked it. But I know from being a queer person in the world that a book or a film is so much easier to talk about than yourself. It is so much easier. And I remember with my mum talking about LGBTQ characters on reality TV, on Big Brother or The X Factor. And they were kind of like a conduit for us to have those really big, difficult conversations. And so I really hope that What's the Tea in This Book is gay. And You Need to Chill, actually, as well.
You Need to Chill is, I mean, so lovely, really nice for little kids.
Yeah, and I know from when I used to teach year one, I did, that wasn't my favourite, I preferred the older kids, but I did a couple of years, on the ground in year one, using picture books to talk about life it's the best way to do it. And whether it's, nothing is sadder than when I see books like And Tango Makes Three being challenged, because it's just a lovely penguin. Just let the penguin have an egg, you guys. And that was what I wanted to do with You Need to Chill as well, because I know from being a teacher and from being a queer person that it's so much easier to kind of have that kind of safe space in the middle. I think with all three of those books, it's just about hoping that they sort of find their audience, just kind of, because I always felt that if This Book is Gay or What's the Tea could find that 15-year-old queer or confused kid, that it might really make a difference, that they might just feel a bit less alone. I know a lot of people will say, well, we have the internet now, so that we don't have a pressing need for nonfiction the way we once did. But I think the internet's really confusing.
Oh, yeah, and scary and mean.
And I really wanted it. I mean, this is the kind, all these people calling my books pornographic. I wrote these books to counter pornography. I wanted young people to get high quality sex education. They didn't have to learn it from pornography, which is not sex education. I don't want young people to get their sex education from the internet. I want them to get it from speaking to trusted adults, or from a book like This Book is Gay. So it's kind of about hoping it finds people. But obviously This Book is Gay has been out for so long now that I know that it really has. And what's really, really lovely, and this has started happening in the last couple of years, it's fully grown adults now come up to me at events, or even somebody came up to me on the tube in London a couple of weeks ago and said, This Book is Gay really helped me to understand who I am.
That's so nice.
It is. And it blew my mind, because this woman looked about 25. She wasn't that young. And I was like, oh my God, this book is getting old. I hope he doesn't mind me saying, but lovely Joe Locke, he plays Charlie in Heartstopper. He came to talk to me at an awards ceremony last year. He was like, oh my God, This Book is Gay changed my life. And I was kind of like, this is amazing. Like,
oh my gosh.
Because you just don't know. Once the book is out, it takes on a life of its own. And most, as much as we would like to think you do, most readers do not write you an email. They do not tweet you. They do not tag you on Instagram. Most readers just read your book, and you never know. And so it's only really at moments like that woman on the tube a couple of weeks ago where you're kind of like, oh my gosh, some random words that I wrote in 2013 sort of changed her life, and that's mad. That is, if I sit with that, I start to feel a bit weird because it feels like, like Galadriel with the ring. Like, I want to give the ring back. It's like, I don't know if I trust myself with that power.
Yeah, you're like, who, me? I did that to you?
I could be Kate Blanchett. I've just compared myself to Kate Blanchett. Oh, she's got ideas.
It's an apt, yeah. Well, it's so nice too, because you've got the picture book, you've got these books for, older kids, young adults, and then you've entered into the adult space with Her Majesty's Royal Coven, and you've got this great representation, because like, this is something I talked about with someone a couple of weeks ago. Like, kids are never too young to see that representation. I would almost prefer that my son go to a school that is inclusive and has these picture books full of different kinds of people, different shapes of families, different ways that everyone works, because that's what he's going to be confronted with as he enters the world. So You Need to Chill is a lovely book that has the great You Need to Chill message while showing there are different kinds of people, and that's okay. Why don't we just calm down about it?
You know what? It's not kids I worry about.
It's not the kids.
Yeah, because I think kids going to be fine when I'm in schools far less than I was when I was writing young adult fiction. But kids, don't get me wrong, teenagers can still be really vicious.
Yeah,
but
it's the adults.
But it's not really about that. They're just horrible to each other. They understand that a school community is a diverse community. I think it's more about sort of adults. And I think it can, even for me, I've just turned 40. It's quite scary sometimes to feel that society has moved on without you. Even I get that with Gen Z. And, I'm sort of really, I really worry that I'm getting things wrong and I'm saying the wrong thing and that I'm like a dinosaur, even though I'm only a millennial. But that's why, I wrote Her Majesty's Royal Coven with a cast. I think, Neve is 34 and then Helen is 39. So they are those kind of upper millennial women. And, that's something that they're dealing with as well, that kind of slight generational gap of they're not boomers, but they're not Gen Z either. And they kind of feel a bit torn between the two, kind of. Right. It's about sort of trying to make sense of that. And I think that's why I think there is a real power in writing a fantasy novel about witches. But also, like, you wouldn't know from the cover, you wouldn't know from anything it says on the back, but it has trans characters. One of the leads is mixed race and she's a lesbian, and it just has a very diverse cast, but it's not necessarily sitting on a pride display in a bookshop. And I think that's quite important as well, because I just think the dream for me is that, when you sit down to watch a TV show or when you go see a Marvel film or when when you go to a cinema, that you're just seeing society for what it really is, which is, you might not like us, but trans people exist.
You're there. Yeah.
We are part of the world. We are not unicorns. We are not sort of goblins. We are just sort of like real people who are in your world, doing the best we can, trying to take care of ourselves and our loved ones. And it's not a big deal. I mean, the end goal for me as an LGBTQ person is just to become really mid, just like really boring. Just kind of, like, just nobody would bat an eyelid, kind of.
So, like, your author's note at the end of this book is gay. Says, in challenging times, it's more important than ever that we come together as a community and support one another. It all starts with kindness, compassion, and you. And so I want to bring that back to Her Majesty's Royal Coven and the Shadow Cabinet, because I feel like these witches have seen some real danger from patriarchal, misogynist, anti-witch groups. And even with HMRC's issues that you've touched on a little bit before, it does feel like for the most part, their underlying message is community and support. Can you speak to how you created that atmosphere, particularly for Neve and Elle and Leonie? I felt like it came through most for them.
I really do think that the best weapon of the patriarchy is to seed division amongst women, which is why I'm very sort of vocal about, I think that women don't need to like each other. I think it would be very naive to say that all women should be holding hands and skipping down the yellow brick road. It's not a Coke commercial in the 70s. I do not want to teach the world to sing. But I do think there should be, because I think there is a natural sort of coalition between all women under the patriarchy. And I think feminism has to be intersectional. I think we all have to recognize that different kinds of women face different kinds of oppression.
Yeah.
And it's about recognizing that, acknowledging that. But I do think we all have a common enemy. And that's that's the allegory from Her Majesty's Royal Coven Witches. Every single witch in that book has a common threat. And it's this rising threat of Satanis, the threefold demon kind of.
Yeah.
And that is my metaphor for the patriarchy. But the problem is when these women fall out, as they do in both book 1 and book 2, all they do is they advance the aims of Satanis. And so that's kind of what I was hoping to get across, because when these women work together, even though they might not like each other, they disagree with each other on a whole bunch of things. Actually, that's the real progress that needs to be made. And I think the word that I like is coalition. It doesn't need to be friendship. It just needs to be coalition.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the coalition, when they do come together, they're really unstoppable. And they've offered such a nice place to land for Theo too.
Yes.
And I love seeing how not at first.
No spoilers. Yes, spoilers.
Not at first, but now it seems like she's doing so much better. I love to see the way that she has grown in this book.
Things happen. And again, always in the
being a teenager is hard.
It really is. It's tough. And it's really nice because obviously there are people who are like, oh, have you quit writing YA? And I don't know, I mean, never say never, but it was nice to sort of have the teenage characters of Holly, Milo and Theo are still very, they come higher in the mix for the second book. It's lovely that Theo has a voice now. In book 1, she is mute. Theo has finally blossomed into the girl she was always meant to be, and she has a voice now. But what's really interesting is because the media is very obsessed on the kind of the makeover portion of a trans person's life. You see it with any famous trans person, that everybody's very fixated on the before and after.
Yeah.
But then what happens next? It's very rarely talked about. And so Theo is about to find out that there is a whole life waiting for her after what happened to her in book 1. And I think there's the assumption as well that the transition is going to be the hardest thing you ever do. But then you're like, oh God, but now I have to date and I have to finish school and I have to get a job and I have to be a functioning member of society. And so Theo is kind of figuring out that actually her life didn't end in book 1. Her life is beginning. And so she now is dealing with a whole bunch of sort of teenage dilemmas with the first rush of young love. But then also, let's not forget, she is the center of a very apocalyptic prophecy, and that hasn't gone anywhere either. So
heavy weight on that poor girl's shoulders.
But she's very pretty and she has lovely hair. So at least there's that. She's got that. She's handling it really well.
She's got a really good friend in Holly, too.
Oh, I love Holly and Theo.
I do, too. They're so sweet together.
Yeah, spin-off.
There you go. There's your YA.
Yes, YA spin-off. Watch this space.
Yeah, I love talking to you, Juno. Thank you so much. This has been a delightful conversation. The Shadow Cabinet comes out in June. You Need to Chill comes out in June. I have them both here. Thank you, Juno. This is my favorite day.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me on. I will come back anytime. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Kat Sarfas, forever bookseller at Barnes & Noble. Today we are joined by the brilliant Emma Törzs. Emma's debut novel, Ink, Blood Sister Scribe, is one book I can't stop talking about. A spellbinding novel about estranged sisters, magical books, familiar royalty and betrayal, and the pursuit of power. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real delight.
Yeah. So I would say I am pretty biased here when it comes to books about books, just in general. But so in this case, we have a book about magical books, which I would say was pretty much going straight to the top of my TBR pile. And that's really just scratching the surface. So there's enchanted mirrors, nefarious family empire, there's mystery, there's drama. You certainly pack a lot of adventure and intrigue into this story. So of course I have to start off with what inspired you to do so.
There's a long answer and a short answer. The long answer involves like many months of sort of writing my way into this book without having any idea what it was going to be about. It was always, however, about sisters. It started out, I really wanted to play with fairy tale tropes. So I'm glad you picked up on a few of them, like the enchanted mirrors, family loyalty is big in fairy tales. So there were 7 sisters at first, but they got whittled down to 2. Turns out it's quite difficult to manage 7 sisters. So I did know that I wanted to write a book about sisters, in part because my own younger sister, I'm very close to her, and she has been begging me since our childhoods to write a book about magic sisters. And I decided, okay, maybe it's time for me to finally do that. So really it's started for her.
Oh, I love that. And that kind of brings me to those sibling narratives. If you have a sibling, which I do, and I also have a sister, so it kind of, it feels very cozy. But whatever the relationship is, sort of whether it's strained or, relaxed, a sibling is sort of like that one person in the world that truly understands where you've come from. And I love sibling relationships. I especially love the sibling relationships between Joanna and Esther. I think there's so many moments between them that are so real for anyone that has a sibling, maybe not the magical bits, but accurately sort of portraying the nuances in sibling relationships is really satisfying, at least for me to read. I know for a lot of people to read. So you said you drew inspiration from your sister.
Yes.
Was there anything else? I know you said you started with 7 sisters. So how? So I'm sure that you were looking at sort of sibling narratives to sort of build into the story.
Yeah, I have one sister, a blood sister, let's say, and then I have 3 stepsisters, 2 on my mom's side and 1 on my dad's side. So I'm sort of wealthy in sisters, for which I'm very, very grateful. I really love my stepsisters. So I was thinking also about the types of family relationships that are not quite as easily defined as just that one-to-one blood siblinghood. Joanna and Esther are half sisters. And while I consider them full siblings, there is that little bit of contention between them, or not contention, but, tension. And I think that no matter how close siblings are in age or whether or not they're fully related, the interesting thing is, yes, it's somebody who fully understands your childhood in a way that nobody else will, but they've also lived a completely different childhood right next to you in the same house with the same parents. And that is endlessly fascinating to me. My sister and I often talk about the different ways that we experienced our childhood, even though we were literally sharing a room for most of it. So I was thinking a lot about that also, those like little differences that make people grow up differently and look back differently at the same experiences.
Yeah. I mean, you do hear, people, if they're the firstborn or the first, the first, and then, the middle child or the youngest. Mm-hmm. And, I think everyone's experiences are different, but there is something to that, where in order, and I would say birthing order, where you fall. I'm the youngest. And and there's certain things where I wouldn't like, people say about youngest and that I wouldn't agree with, and other things where I'm like, in terms of experiences and like, and how, in terms of like the parallels of your childhood versus like, my older sibling. And it's interesting. And then now I have children and I'm watching like their dynamics kind of play out, and I can't help but be like sympathetic to the young, like to the baby, and be like, and it's funny because my husband's who is a firstborn, and he's like more like kind of being like, well, and like, it's sort of like we're sort of playing these stories out now in another capacity. So yeah, endless, I think siblings in general, endlessly.
They are super fascinating. Yes, my older sister heart was beating in sympathy for your youngest child.
Yeah, it's just, it's like one of those where I'm like, you try to have overall sympathy, but you can't, but when you have that sort of lived experience, like you can't help but possibly have certain biases, but just the family dynamics in general. And I think it's really interesting to hear you say, yes, how they're not technically full blood siblings, half siblings, but just seeing how close they were. And then, like you said, even as you grow up, as they get older, how relationships start to change. You start to become more aware of things and your differences. And so that's just very, very interesting. And I want to get back to sort of the family and also the found family that we see here in the book. But I want to talk about villains, because I love to talk about villains. And you have created such a wonderful sort of like magic system. And then you have this like fantastical world that you sort of built. And I feel like you do all of this like framework, but you got to have good villains. And I really loved how you played with your antagonists. And I want to start with the library, which is like an institution, not a person, but a villain doesn't need to be necessarily a person. I think many of us look at libraries as sort of like this beacon of goodness and knowledge and a place of preservation. And this library holds some dark secrets and obviously like a lot of parallels to sort of, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about that and how you sort of came to this idea of a library.
I really like that you said villains don't necessarily have to be individuals. They can be institutions. And I was thinking of certain, in my mind, villainous institutions when I was thinking about building the library. Mostly I was sort of thinking about the very wide general institution of colonialism and how, in the name of quote unquote preservation, empire has taken over and taken as their own so much precious knowledge from other places. And, it's not a coincidence that the library is in London or in England, because I do sort of associate that as like the seat of colonial power, as I understand it, being a US citizen. And I was thinking about like the British Museum. There's been lots of conversation about repatriation of sacred objects to different places that British Museum has taken. And I have a good friend who's Cypriot. And we had a really interesting conversation where we thought we had found an ancient Cypriot amphora at a thrift store in Virginia. And we had like all this conversation, like she was calling the embassy, trying to repatriate this Cypriot amphora. It turned out to be a fake.
Oh, no.
But in a really interesting way, like it's a fake that is well known for being a really good fake. I was thinking about all those things like the repatriation of objects and how institutions often under the guise of protection are actually enacting damage and being oppressive in general.
So, we kind of introduced in this library, and it is a little bit, when you first start to, read about it, you're kind of like, oh, okay, well, they're just collecting. And then you kind of go into where they've been, acquiring and how they've literally just sort of washed away certain, like, again, it starts off with, there's all these like little collectors or all these families that, hold these books and protect these books. And then they're all sort of like bought up. And then you kind of see this sort of like the monopoly, and you kind of realize, okay, maybe we're not as our mission is not as worthy as we, or what their mission is, what they're saying is maybe not as good as you think it is. So yeah, it was just really interesting to kind of, how it starts and like, your thoughts on it when you're first reading about it. And then, how you sort of continue and sort of build that narrative around this institution, this empire. But then of course there's also the players behind this sort of institution who made it, who, what it is. And so we'll start with Richard, who again, you kind of think of this like loving uncle, and you do, and the way you write it, you kind of get wrapped up in that part of it, like that, again, that one slice of what you're seeing. And then you pull the rug out from under us, and and then you're kind of like, how did I not see this all along? But, then, you follow along. But so Richard, again, thinking, parallels of like people who are in power who, maybe they came into it for the right reasons, or they say they came into it for the right reasons, but really, and then playing with sort of this inherited magic and bloodlines, it was really just really interesting. So where did you sort of pull that from?
Well, I think it was important for me to convey a sense of paternalism through Richard, because I do think that there is a kind of condescending paternalism that comes with saying, we can protect this better than you can. We can keep these things safe better than you can. And by you, I mean, countries that have had things taken from them by colonialism and empire. And that's sort of like the very broad description. But on like a character to character level, I did want there to be a feeling that Nicholas feels really safe with Richard and feels well kept by Richard. Nicholas himself is a resource. And so I wanted him to be sort of like a living, feeling, sentient resource to this paternalistic person who really does want to keep him safe. Richard has good reasons for wanting to keep him very safe. And I think one of them is perhaps affection. We could argue about that. But I don't think that there's a total absence of that kind of paternalistic affection that comes when you're trying to keep something safe. If you're trying to keep something safe, it's because you think it's precious and you're going to treat it a certain way. So I was thinking about that as I was writing their relationship.
And then, so just to round out that nice trifecta, Meram, and I hope I'm saying that character's name correctly. And I really struggled with because it was this, she obviously has this ambition. And is that bad? She's obviously, when you first are introduced to this character, she's in one way and or you think she is as one character. As you will all have to read the book, once you get further on, you sort of uncover this other life that she sort of had, and that, the ambition she's had, and that kind of what that the path that led her down. And I guess, thinking of, Richard is in more of that patriarchal patriarch, like in that kind of center. And then her, and I didn't want to, I mean, I'm throwing her in this sort of villain character, category, because and maybe in some parts, or in some ways she is, but I didn't want to. I think I definitely like learning more about her, and especially learning about her lives. You have wonderful, strong female characters here, and I'm thinking about Cecily and then Meram, and just almost the sort of gag order that the two of them sort of, get into to sort of protect their family. And it did sort of, highlight a lot of these similar issues that I think women go through in their lives. And that sort of delicate balance of ambition and protecting, feeling that maternal instinct to sort of protect your family, and that balance that I think that we're all expected as women to sort of perfect, or to sort of be great, very graceful, and it's very messy. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on those. So, I mean, Mare in particular, but Cecily as well. Well,
I said earlier that I was really interested in playing with certain fairy tale tropes, because I just wanted to have a good time while I was writing this novel.
Of course.
It was in the middle of the pandemic. I honestly just made a list of my favorite tropes and sort of checked them off as I dealt with them. But the evil stepmother or the dead mother are two tropes that come up constantly in fairy tales. And I really wanted to play with those. So Cecily is the stepmother, and Maram is sort of a stepmother also in a way, like she's Nicholas's closest maternal figure. And I don't think Cecily is evil at all. I wanted to make her like a really loving, devoted mother to Esther, even though she's technically Esther's stepmother. So Cecily is sort of one part of that evil stepmother, and then Maram is the other part of the evil stepmother. And a lot of the evil stepmothers are very ambitious people. They have clearly articulated goals and desires, even if their desire is just to be the fairest in all of the land, which is perhaps a shallow desire, but, also appearance is really important when you're trying to be a woman in power,
Yeah.
Not that you should like cut out the heart of your stepchild and eat it. Or
maybe not take it that far. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not take it that far. But so I was sort of just thinking about playing around with the stepmother trope and that idea of ambition and power and how it might manifest for a woman seeking that type of power, which often comes historically through marrying or allying yourself with a powerful person. In this case, Maram aligns herself with Richard. So I was kind of thinking of all that. And also I just wanted to have a good time, like I said, while I was writing. And Maram was very fun for me to write. So there's that little facet of it as well.
No, it is true. We're talking about like, tropes, and it's so interesting. I think that especially, today, and we have this sort of like wealth of fairy tale reimaginings and, people kind of playing, flipping these sort of traditional tropes, talking about the evil stepmother, or why does the mother always have to die? So many of these. It was really interesting to see sort of those mother figures, and that their dynamic. And it really makes sense when you were saying how they are sort of like two sides of that evil stepmother trope. That's really interesting. And again, sorry for anyone who's listening who hasn't read the book. You'll just have to read it, and then you'll see how wonderfully interesting it is. All right, so getting to now my favorite little quartet. We've got Joanna and Esther, and then we have Nicholas and Collins. And this sort of, I love that there is sort of, there's queer representation with Esther. There's this sort of feeling of found family when all of a sudden when the four of them sort of come together, it feels just very like it clicks. And I think it clicks for them too. And I feel like fantasy as a genre can, I think, be a safe space for the LGBTQIA community. And you can use it, to highlight an issue, to promote empathy, or to sort of create, on the other side, to create a utopia where readers can sort of escape to a place where certain, maybe norms or injustices simply don't exist. So what is your favorite thing about writing fantasy?
Oh, wow. What a great question. I was starting to formulate an answer about found family, which really is one of my favorite things. I was telling somebody, I just went to see the Dungeons and Dragons movie with my students. I'm teaching a fantasy fiction class. And so we went to see the D&D movie. And they said one of my favorite lines in all of fantasy, which is like, it's time to get a team together. Yeah. It's like, yes, I'm just such a sucker for that.
That's true. It is.
I love a team. And I think one of the amazing things about fantasy is that readers, and I don't want to generalize too much because fantasy has a long, long history. And we're sort of at an exciting new bend in the road for that history, I think.
I would very much agree with that statement.
Yeah. And it is historically, sort of for white men. And my students and I were cackling over like the second edition of the D&D handbook. The first line is like, we boast an enormous diversity of players. We have plumbers, electricians, we have people in cities, we have people in countries, and we even have some women. We were just dying. Yeah. We're like, okay, so you have like diverse white men. That's funny. So, there's like that whole long history, which I love some books in that lineage. But I do think that we're in this really exciting new time where people are coming to fantasy for the best part of fantasy, I think, which is to experience a world that you don't experience day by day. And so people come to fantasy with slightly more open minds in terms of world building. You'll read a book as like an American, maybe you read a book set in New Delhi, and there's a certain amount of world building that you need from the writer as a Western reader to understand what's going on. Or that writer maybe is writing for a non-Western audience or an audience that's more familiar with that location, and they're not going to do as much world building. And I read these Goodread comments that are like, I didn't understand half of what was going on. The place names were confusing. Why are there all these wild foreign names? And you don't get that in fantasy. You can name somebody like Xanthria 99.
Like whatever.
Like, yeah, totally. So I think there is like more willingness and patience to be with something that feels different or difficult to immediately understand. And I don't think that's the case for my book in particular. I think that my book is like pretty Western in a lot of ways. It's set in the US and London. Like, what's more Western than that? And it's like not that the magic system is not super complicated, I don't think. But I read books like The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, which is set, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's like ancient India, and I use ancient so loosely because I'm like, what even does that mean and when?
Yes, like how far back do we have to go?
Yeah,
categorizing things as like ancient. Yeah,
it's a very loose categorization. But I read that book, and part of the joy is discovering both a new magic and a new world, and feeling the excitement of the unfamiliar. To me, it's unfamiliar. To other readers, it won't be as unfamiliar. Like some readers will come to my book, it's not going to be unfamiliar. Anybody who grew up in Vermont will be like, aha, yes, the outdoor outfitter with the moose out front. We know that. Anyway, that's a really long answer. That's one of my favorite parts, I think, of fantasy right now in particular. That's what gets me jazzed, though I'm not necessarily a practitioner of that kind of fantasy.
No, and it is, and I say that a lot now. And I think because, I am sort of loving whatever you want to call this sort of golden age, rainbow age. I don't know what we want to call, what's the best way to say it, but of fantasy, because I think, for me growing up, these books did not exist, and when you kind of came into fantasy, it was a lot of, and I'm not gonna, I read a lot of Lord of the Rings fan fiction, and that was a safe space for me, even though there's pretty much no female characters, not a lot of representation, but it was like, well, that was sort of my entryway. And that's kind of, I still loved it. I still loved the idea of, again, sort of like suspending belief for a moment, and kind of entering, if you can suspend belief and enter this world and sort of live in it, why can't you open your mind to other things? Why can't you
totally
suspend, just like, hear me out, crazy idea, maybe we should all think about human rights more, or like, just like, I don't know, like if we can think, if people, out there who can learn Elvish, it's like, maybe you can learn Spanish, like, I don't know, like, it's just, like crazy thoughts. For me, even though there wasn't this sort of broad community of fantasy writers and these amazing stories that we have now, there was still that part where it was like, if you can believe this, if you can live here and live in this world and accept this, then there's hope for us all in a way.
Yeah, I think at its best, fantasy can do that. It can open magical doors into other ways of thinking and other ways of seeing. And I think it's doing that more and more lately.
Yes. I know this is a standalone, and I know most fantasies are sort of, everyone loves the big series, but this is a standalone. However, I have to ask, in a world where maybe there's a spinoff, who gets this spinoff? And I want to say my bets are on Sir Kiwi, but I might be alone here. I'm thinking like picture books, really. Like, I mean, I feel
Sir
like
Kiwi and the cat.
Yeah, like I think that we could do a lot there. But no, in all seriousness, the novel, again, it's beautiful, and it wraps up, and you feel good, and like I feel like it could be open, like there are openings, but at the same time you feel satisfied, you feel fulfilled. But then I always love to ask that question, especially with standalones, like who gets, in a crazy world, who gets the random spinoff?
I will say my party line is, I have no plans to write a sequel. I did want it to be really satisfying to read alone. However, if there was to be another book in this world, I would probably focus more on like those smaller enclaves of book communities. So like the group in Boston would probably get some attention. And obviously, I think Maram would have to have a much more, she deserves her own full.
Yes. No, I think she was story. So, I don't know. And maybe it's like a motherhood thing, but like I was surprised at how much I connected. Again, and it's not that she's not an important character, but how much I sort of had feelings, Good.
I'm glad.
Feelings about her life and her trajectory as a woman, as an ambitious woman, and sometimes I think it's, and I'm sure you've had many instances we all have when you're reading a book, and it is those maybe non-essential, I don't know, I hate to say non-essential characters. I do feel like every character is essential in some way, but how they just strike you, or they're the ones that like cut a nerve. And maybe it is because they're not fully explored that we have that sense of yearning afterwards to sort of know more about them. I don't know.
Or I wonder if it's that as a reader, you can just sense the many, many pages that are on my computer about Maram that did not make it into the final. You're just like, I know it's there. I could
just like, it's just that sense. I could feel it out there. Yeah. There's words and sentences and paragraphs, that I can get to consume. And that is so interesting. I was just having a conversation the other day about, in fantasy. And actually this brings me to the next thing I want to talk to you about, which is your short fiction. How, when you consume a lot of fantasy, I think reading like 500, 600, 700 page books, it's just sort of like, that's the norm.
Totally.
Like you just kind of, you buckle up and like you're ready for it as a fan. You kind of, again, you're ready to escape. You're ready to sort of enter and suspend whatever beliefs. And while I love a good epic, I also really love short stories. I feel like I'm at either end. I'm either like,
wow, I love to hear that.
Yes. Like I'm like, give me, and even like, I feel like this is like the same with, like film. Like give me like a 3-hour extended edition. And then I want to know all the behind the scenes stuff. Like give me that, or give me like a 30 minute like comedy episode. I don't want anything. I don't want anything in between. I really love short stories. I really do. And I wish more people, really understood sort of what goes into making a short story and how that could even oftentimes is sort of more difficult than being able to sort of plot through, 600 pages. So you've written some very lovely short fiction, which you've gotten awards for. What is the biggest challenge, or what are the biggest challenges, but also like the highest rewards for each?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And I think the answer is the same. Like the biggest challenge is also the highest reward for me in short fiction, which is that in a short space, a short story is maybe 5,000 words, as opposed to my novel, at least, is like 125,000 words. So that's many, many more words. And
lots of
many more multiples of 5. So in like a 5,000 word story, every word is incredibly important because there's just not that many of them. So when I'm crafting a short story, it's so deeply for me at the level of the language. And I write sentence by sentence, like beat by beat. It feels really musical in a way. And I'm paying so close attention to like the weight in everything, like how the words are weighted and where the balance is. And it feels like a fun jigsaw puzzle is how I've described it, like trying to find that perfect word to slot into the sentence so that it has the right cadence and the right meaning. And it's really satisfying, but it's also extremely challenging because you just have a much more compressed space. At least for me, it takes a long time to figure out like what it is I'm really writing about. So if you look at my drafts of short stories, it's like if a short story is 15 pages, that's the end result. The draft is like 100 pages.
Yeah.
It takes me a long time to get there. And then once I know really what the story is about, that's when I get to go back and do all that like minute fiddling.
Yeah.
To make it just feel tight and cohesive. And you do not have that in a novel as much. Like I really had to unclench a little bit in terms of like the sentence by sentence thing. For me, it's still like the greatest pleasure is the language of a book. So I still have to write sentence by sentence. I just like can't do it any other way. I've tried to do the messy first draft thing and it just really doesn't work for me. A novel requires so much delusion. I've described it as like a delusion bubble. Like I have to believe personally that every sentence I'm writing will stay in the book, even though I know absolutely without a doubt it will probably get deleted.
Yes. But that's good. Hope is not a bad thing.
Yeah. It's just like, I have to be totally in it, in that delusion, being like, nope, this is it. Yes, it's the 10th draft of this chapter, but this is the draft that's finally going to stick. And I thought that at the first draft too, I have to believe it fully for every draft, but it's very, very challenging to be a sentence by sentence writer and also keep track of a big sprawling story. And, this book, I come from a literary background. So like I wrote literary fiction up until about 5 years ago when I had a big sea change and turned my back on literary realism. And, so a lot of my early work was literary realism and most of my published stories are still literary realism. But they're not big on plot and no one ever taught me how to do it. And so this book, Blood Sister Scribe, I wanted to make it like plotty. I was like, I'm going to write like a plotty book. And I had no idea how to do it. So I just kept throwing wrenches in and then trying to write my way through them. And if it didn't work, I would just delete everything and throw in another wrench and then write my way through that. But that like keeping all the wrenches in my brain was the biggest challenge and also one of the biggest pleasures. So that's a very long answer.
No, but I love it. It's, sometimes I think the challenge is the reward, and so it's not
totally.
So it's not uncommon to have, to say like, oh, it was that again, just seeing all of your the short fiction you've written and just thinking like, and I know you wrote a novel prior to this one.
I did. Yep. I wrote a literary realism novel.
Which we don't have to talk about since we've obviously turned our backs on.
I'm so glad it will never be seen by any eyes other than me and my agent.
And that's fine.
And all the editors who rejected it.
And everyone who put all that work into it.
Yeah.
Okay. We're allowed to sort of, to grow and to explore. And what is next for you?
Great.
Are we going back to short, but maybe like short stories? Are we like, no, let's go back to let novels. We'll let that stay for a while.
Yeah. I tried to go back to short fiction. And I feel like something cracked in my brain, and now I'm only thinking in terms of novels.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's gonna be another novel. I have tentatively started work on a new project that I am excited about. I am like really hold things close to my chest. I don't like to talk about them until they're out there, but I will share with you 4 keywords to the next project.
All right, everybody.
Which is loom, broom, loon, moon.
Oh, and I like the little rhyming.
I made them rhyme.
Fabulous. I can draw so many. Of course, in mind instantly stuff. My fantasy brain, instantly starts like, moon. That's a good one. That's got a lot of clues, a lot of symbolism.
I just took a weaving class. That's another little clue. I made 2 scarves. I'm very proud of them.
Oh gosh,
I think they came out well.
You should be. First of all, you should be proud. I'm assuming this was a new skill. This is like
yes, of 1 month ago when I took this 3-day weaving intensive.
Yes, but I think. And just like like any new skill, whether it be writing, learning how to write plot, learning like diving into a novel. I just think it's so. I love to hear people talk about, and I think, and I don't know, and I hate to say this, if it was like a pandemic thing, where people kind of, all of a sudden decided that learning new skills is something of worth, or that you are worthy of the time to learn a new skill at any age. Like it's not something where like, okay, you go to high school and maybe you go to college and maybe you go to graduate school and then like learning stops. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah. I am just a perpetual student. I'll take, especially now that I've been a professor for so many years, I'm just like, I'll do anything to sit in a classroom and learn something. I love it so much. And I'm hugely into hobbies. I'm a big proponent of have a hobby that will never make you any money and just enjoy yourself and be kind of bad at it.
Be a weaver.
Yeah.
Be a weaver. Be a weaver.
Weave some chunky scarves that all your friends will be like, oh yeah, that's really pretty. No, I don't want one. That's okay. Don't waste your time.
And that's when you're like, yeah, I'll make one for you. Just based on that.
Oh, everybody's getting scarves from now until forever. I'm fully in it. They'll get better, I think.
Well, that's the thing with the skill. You have to work at it. That's, and I feel like I said this, it's funny when I'm talking to my little peoples, my children at this time, and just trying to invoke that, like anything worth learning takes time.
Absolutely.
So being on the other end of seeing that you want to be on the other end of the teaching process, wanting to be a student, I always love to ask this question to sort of kind of close things out. Because I'm always looking for great book recommendations, but I think it's always nice to sort of talk about, when you're in your process, but then also just, that love of other writers that I think so many writers have, and just in general, loving book recommendations from brilliant women. So what are you reading now? Or what was the last book that you read that you couldn't stop talking about?
Oh, wow. These are really good questions. I get panicky every time anybody asks me for a book recommendation. I have Post-its on my wall that I'm looking at to remind me, because you say, what are you reading? And I'm like, I don't think I've ever read a book in my whole life. I don't remember.
I've never read anything.
Never.
Even though you probably have a stack of books. Like
I have a giant stack of books. Yeah. I just got on, I was really lucky enough to see him. He came through Minneapolis and I went to see him talk Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei. I'm so excited. Lucky. It's right next to my bed. I'm like probably going to start reading it right after this conversation. And then I'm about halfway through The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. whose first book, The Vanished Birds, is a book I could not stop talking about. It's like a sci-fi space opera, maybe sort of thing. It's not, 500 pages. When you hear space opera, maybe you think.
I think people do that. Correlate the same.
But yeah, it's like a nice, neat, good story. It's The Vanished Birds I was sobbing in public so intensely that like multiple people came over to see if I was okay. The first chapter, I tell everybody, read the first chapter. And if you're not astonished at the beauty of the writing and just in awe of the virtuosic performance of this writer, then like there's no hope for you. It's one of the greatest first chapters
don't ever ask me for a recommendation again. Yeah.
Truly, yeah. So I'll read anything he writes. I'm like just sold on Simon Jimenez. And I also just finished and really enjoyed The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi by S.A. Chakraborty.
Yes.
It was just a rollicking good time and about like a middle-aged mom pirate. And I was just complaining to somebody that there's just no middle-aged women in fantasy novels. And in fact, it's like the older characters in fantasy novels are usually like grizzled old mercenary men.
Yes.
And this is sort of a grizzled old mercenary pirate woman on the Indian Ocean hunting treasure. And it's extremely good.
Yes, it is really, I will back that up as having read it as well. And I loved, and I think, that's pretty much what sold me on it. When I read, I was like, so aging pirate mother queen, like not queen, but like in my head, I was like, so she's a queen,
right?
Like, yeah, basically reclaiming her status, like reclaiming, flipping, kind of rewriting her story. And I was like, yeah, I'm all, and then when you think about, like you said, from a fantasy perspective, put that in, and you're just kind of like, yeah, that doesn't exist. Like those stories don't exist.
It's really a lot about like the balancing of wanting to protect your child, but also being like a badass lady who wants to go on big adventures, which I have no children myself, but a lot of my amazing friends do. And I see that struggle playing out in like, smaller ways. None of them are like, I'm going to get on that ship and hunt down this missing girl. But it is like, it's a constant struggle, especially like artistic friends who are like, I want to go on this residency or to this conference, but here's this darling young person who
here's this little person that is
cry if I
leave.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. The constant. It is a constant struggle. But speaking of adventures, Ink, Blood, Sister Scribe. I have my like very worn art copy that I almost wanted to show you. I have like an even one with that didn't even have the cover. That was just like I had like an.
You got the blue one?
Yes, and I almost bought that one, and then I was like, no, we'll show the nice one. It is an adventure, and I think that the emotions, and again, with the characters, and I love the different point of views, and it's just really brilliant and just fun, and like something where I feel like when you are when you're reading a lot of 500, 600 page epic. This, while still like I think a little over 400 pages, not nothing to
Yeah, it's no doorstopper though.
No, but it's also not it's not like it's a short novella. But it was just lovely, and it was such a wonderful time, and I just to escape a little bit and hang out with these characters and hang out with them and sort of pull the parallels from this world into our own world, and again makes you think and just sort of helps you open your mind and understanding. And it was really wonderful. And thank you so much for writing it.
Oh, thank you so much for reading it and having me. I feel like I yammered a lot about like colonialism, but I do think the book is very fun. I had a blast writing it. And so I'm really happy to hear that you had a good time reading it.
Yes.
And it was lovely to talk to you today.
Yes. So thank you again. This has been wonderful. Ink, Blood, Sister Scribe is out now.
Hello, readers. It's time for another TBR Top Off. We're going to recommend a couple of great books to go along with today's special double shot episode. I'm Mark. I'm coming to you from my Barnes & Noble in Cincinnati, and I'm joined by my book buddy, Jamie. Hello, Jamie.
Hi, Mark. I'm Jamie. I'm coming to you from Leawood, Kansas.
Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. I wanted to recommend a book for The Shadow Cabinet by Dawson. And it made me think of a title that's come across pretty recently and has kind of spiked in popularity, and that's Unnatural Magic by C.M. Wagner. This is just a very nice escape. It's an escape to a lovely world. It's a debut author, and it just takes you somewhere on a nice trip and is just a fun read. We follow two characters who are vastly different, but the way that their separate stories start to kind of braid together is just really lovely. We follow Anna, who think Hermione Granger before she goes to school. She is studious. She is a bit of a know-it-all. She is practicing and studying her magical skills to try and get into this very prestigious academy. And all she really cares about is books and this school. Meanwhile, we have Sira, who is a troll, who essentially is kind of striving for agency and dominance. Her culture is really trying to put her in a box of subservience, wanting to have her married off and be the sort of like kind, nice wife, as troll wives should be. And she says, absolutely not. I'm explosive and a loudmouth and pretty messy, and I don't want to have anything to do with that. As you can imagine, things get witchy and explosive, and these two ladies essentially discover their own strengths inside themselves, within each other and the people that they care about, and their place in this world. I think the writing is very good for a first-time author. The story kind of stands out. There's just an endless sea of female-driven fantasy out there these days. And I think Unnatural Magic is one of those that you go, oh, hey, I notice you. And I would like to know more about what this author can pull off. So check out Unnatural Magic by C.M. Wagner. Jamie, what do you have for us?
I am going to recommend something to read along with Blood Sister Scribe. I'm going to talk today about Rachel Caine. So I tend to be maybe a little more literature forward, I think, in my recommendations here, but in my off the clock reading, so to speak, there are plenty of good old fun adventure stories with romance and betrayal and fast action and horror and everything kind of all at once. And these are, I think, like perfect paperbacks to read by the pool sort of books. And that's where I'd put this young adult fantasy series that I'm going to recommend today. And that's Rachel Caine was the author, and it's called The Great Library series. And specifically book 1 is Ink and Bone. And this one is also for the bookworms. People love books about books, right? This is an alternative history where the Great Library of Alexandria never burned, and which on the surface, that sounds wonderful. But in reality, it means that it's become this mega entity, this organization that controls who has access to all physical books. In fact, most people in this world have never actually touched a real book because the Great Library controls all the access to the books and effectively all knowledge. And so, of course, a black market springs up around books. And this is where our protagonist comes in. Jess Brightwell is, of course, from a family of book smugglers. Right at the outset, we get to experience a little bit of action with Jess and his family around the way that they procure these books. His father, who is a real schemer, comes up with this big idea that he's going to send Jess to train as a librarian at the Great Library. Which is not like a librarian that you and I know, but it's actually this really high stakes kind of thrilling job that's all about protecting and defending books everywhere. They find the books, they recover them in any way necessary, even giving up their own lives if needed, and they secure them in the library. And the plan between Jess and his father is that Jess is going to be able to smuggle out some really rare books and provide the family with this big windfall and possibly with some influence going forward. But when Jess gets there, of course, he's going to meet a group of friends and enemies, just like any other school story. And he really gets sucked into the competitive atmosphere and the intense training to be a librarian. And he's doing all this while sort of dealing with the strict rules and constant surveillance that the library has on him that makes it impossible for him to spy for his family. And plus, of course, the library has secrets that it wants to protect at all costs. So I don't want to give away a lot of the plot because this one has plenty of surprises like magic and intrigue and betrayal. But as Jess and his friends progress in their librarian training, they begin to question the library, the organization's motives and its methods, especially around the suppression of knowledge It decides who gets access to information, who doesn't and why. And it leads Jess and his friends to become embroiled in this dangerous plot in which they're secretly sort of challenging the rules and the censorship and the control that the library has. And they decide they want to make the world better and fairer for everyone and give knowledge to everyone. And so Jess has to manage all of that subterfuge while he's simultaneously spying for his father. So he's kind of balancing on this knife's edge, which really adds to the tension of the book. Rachel Caine was a great author. She was a pro who wrote prolifically across many genres. And this is a quick, fun read, but it also has darkness and magic and books and all the things that we like in a fun paperback. I heard somebody describe it as a little Harry Potter and a little bit Fahrenheit 451. I think there's also a little bit of Lev Grossman's The Magician series in there. And so I think it would be a great fit for somebody who read Blood Sister Scribe and wants more magical book intrigue in their life. I assume everybody wants that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that I could always use a book about a book, and give me a fun, summery, magical snack. You know, I think you and I are similar in that we read a lot of literary fiction, we read a lot of meals, but we also enjoy a snack. And I think there is equal place for both. So fantastic pick. But that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for tuning in to Poured Over. Please make sure to give us a rating and subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also follow us on our socials at Barnes & Noble. I'm Mark. You can follow my home store at BN Westchester.
And I'm Jamie. You can follow my home store at BN Leawood KS.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Happy reading.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.